We're so grateful that you're making this contribution to us.
Well, thank you very much for taking the interest to record this oral history. I haven't written any of this down, so this is really a primary document, in effect.
Wonderful. And you were saying you're planning on contributing it as well?
Yes, I'll add it to my family's archives at the Washington Holocaust Memorial Museum. Actually, the museum that recently had the assault with the old Nazi man who came and killed the security guard there.
Yes. So where shall we start today?
I should explain who I am, I suppose, and what my origins are. I'm not from Montreal originally. I'm here since 23 years. I've raised a son here as a Québécois Jewish, first Québécois Jewish person. I'm originally from Toronto, downtown Toronto, where my parents came to live after the Holocaust, because both my parents were survivors in the sense that they had escaped from the Holocaust itself. And they escaped from each of the ghettos to which they were confined. So they weren't survivors of the death camps, which is usually what the term survivor refers to, but it has come to mean as well those people who survived by escaping beforehand or during the Holocaust, or who were hidden during the Holocaust. There's all sorts of conditions of survival which led to about 250,000 survivors in Europe and about 500,000 survivors who escaped into the Soviet Union during the war, which is what my parents did, from Poland, from each of the cities of Warsaw and Lublin. And they're fairly close to the border with Russia there, and so they were able to cross over by getting as close to the border as possible with public transport, but in a hidden way, because tickets were not allowed to be sold to Jewish people at the time. And then when they got close enough to the border, they walked the rest of the way across the border. And in each of my parents' cases, they had a somewhat different context. For instance, my mother, who was in the Warsaw Ghetto, received a message from her brother who had escaped and had set up a camp in the forest in Russia across the border, and was setting up what in effect would be called an underground railway, so that he could counsel people on how to escape from the ghetto and where to go, because a lot of people didn't even think of escaping because they didn't know where to go. And there were no countries in the Western world who were accepting Jewish refugees before the war, and not even during the Holocaust, and even for a year after the Holocaust, the refugees were not accepted in the Western countries, such as Canada.
None is too many.
Yes, that book documents that, and United States. And during the war, of course, there was that boat, the SS Saint-Louis, which attempted to bring some refugees into Canada, the United States, and Cuba, and they were rejected in all the countries to which they came, and they went back and brought those refugees back to France, and a large percentage of those refugees were then sent to death camps subsequently. So even though my father had a sister who was already living in Toronto and was sponsored as an immigrant, it still took a year of waiting in the refugee camp in order to get the visa from Canada. And each of my parents were in the same refugee camp where they met in Breslau, northeastern Germany, a portion of land that was taken over by the U.S. administration, U.S. military, and there were there was an area that was depopulated of its German population, who were made into refugees, sent into central Germany. The Jewish refugees were put into that territory for a while. It lasted about 3 years in total that there were refugee camps there. And then that territory was sliced off Germany and given to Poland. Now, of course, the territory could have been given to the Jewish refugees to solve the refugee problem right then and there, but it was not even conceived of at the time. So I was conceived in the refugee camp there in Breslau and carried across the Atlantic, by boat at the time. It took a month's passage. My parents came in 47 and I was born in 48, in the spring of 48, on what's called Erev Pesach, which is the evening of Passover. And here I am 61 years later, survived. And my parents are both gone now. They were quite old. My mother was quite aged, when I was born, so I was the one and only child born to my parents.
How old were your parents when they met?
They must have been, my mother must have been 36, my father 37 or so. And I was born when she was 37. And in the refugee camp, right after the war, amongst the refugees, people, set themselves up as couples, immediately, and a third of the women were pregnant. We were, the first baby boom, post-war baby boom, right then and there, just like that. Because during the war there weren't any babies that were made because it was impossible. It was impossible to survive and have a family at the same time. Usually, if parents were escaping, they usually had their children left with some local family in order to ensure their survival and to risk their own afterwards. So that was the beginning of the new life.
In Toronto, because
in
of
Toronto,
the
yeah.
links
Well,
to
in the
your
refugee
father.
camp started, and then in Toronto afterwards. And then how we were received is very, very important, because it wasn't just government policy that Jewish refugees were not allowed into Canada. This was also the popular sentiment. Jewish refugees were not welcome in Canada at the end of the war. Neither by the general population, which was mostly Christian at the time, nor even by the Canadian Jewish population. The general population used our legal definition of displaced persons, DP, and it became a slur. DPs, was a slur name. It was, an insult. And usually English people would refer to us as not just DPs, but as fucking DPs. It was, a very strong emphasis on the derogatory sort of nature of it. And then in the Canadian Jewish population, which were generally well integrated, partially assimilated, to a good extent, middle-class families, they refer to us as DP nicks. Because in Yiddish, if you say a nick after a word, that means it's like a diminution of the word, of the term. So we were like little DPs, in the Canadian Jewish culture. And as a result, we really didn't mix very much, with the Canadian Jewish population, and practically not at all with the Canadian English population.
Because the language you spoke at home?
No, because of fear, basically, and because the Canadian population didn't want to talk with us. And we didn't want to talk with them either, because we assumed that there was a hostility, an ingrained hostility present, and there was no purpose in talking with English Canadians.
So this was your experience when you went to school in Toronto? Is this something that you...
No, this was my first experience, like in just living and going out on the street. Like I was warned by my mother, don't go east of Yonge Street because you will be beaten up. That's what I was told explicitly. In other words, don't go and mix.
But was that your experience, or was that your mother's experience being transmitted to you?
Well, I assumed that she knew what she was talking about. I wasn't going to risk it, first of all. And generally, the experiences that I had, seemed to confirm that. And because it was difficult enough, getting along or being, respected by the Canadian Jewish population, so I assumed that it would be much more difficult to get along with the English Canadian population. The Canadian Jewish population I met up with in the Jewish school that I went to. Before that, we generally socialized only with the other refugee families. We tended to live in the same sector of the city, around Bathurst College area or Kensington area. And we had our own association, which was called the Warsaw Mutual Benefit Society. And we had picnics in Hyde Park every year, and we'd all get together. And then the adults would have their meetings. And they would go to visit other families in the evening who were also refugee families. And we generally conversed amongst ourselves in Yiddish. So I didn't learn English first, I learned Yiddish first. Because when my parents came, they didn't speak English.
Of course.
So to me, they spoke in Yiddish. And my mother more often than my father, because my father got a job as a cleaner in the Osgood Hall Law School. So he worked in the evenings from 4 to 12. So I never saw him. And so my mother spoke with me in Yiddish, but in the Warsaw dialect of Yiddish, which is the more cosmopolitan Jewish political culture in Poland. Whereas my father came from Lublin, which was a southern city, more agricultural area, and poor, much poorer, and more religious than the Warsaw Jewish community. Although both my parents were Orthodox in Jewish and religious persuasion.
And maintained that once they were in Toronto as well?
Yes, they only went to Orthodox synagogues. At least my father did. My mother hardly went to synagogue at all because women didn't go to the synagogue. And so I was obliged to go to the Orthodox synagogue. And I was Orthodox. I was raised Orthodox. And I was, very believing, And I considered the matter of Jewish identity to be Orthodox Jewish. In fact, the other sort of currents of Judaic thought, like the conservative trend or the reform trend, to me were not really Jewish. I considered the conservatives to be like Protestants.
You're talking currently or even back then, growing up and observing around you, your peers?
Well, that's what I considered, from the beginning.
Okay.
And if we want to get into, my political evaluations of what those currents, are presently, then they wouldn't be that much different, actually. Because I do consider conservative and the reform tendencies to be a form of Protestant thought, which was, emerged out of the Reformation in Europe, which sought to combine religious thought with national identity. And so these currents are basically, the modernist tendency of Jewish political culture, which express national identity in religious terms. However, okay, so I went to a Jewish school full-time at first. I didn't go to English school. I was sent to a Jewish full-time school in my first year. However, my cousin, who was Canadian Jewish and was, very well-educated woman, recommended to my mother that I be sent to a public school. And so the following year I was changed to a public school. And because they didn't recognize the Jewish school, I was required to start again at the first year. And and also they probably, felt that because my language skills were not the same as the other students, that I wasn't capable of studying to the same degree in all subject matters. So I was put back into the first year without any, remedial courses, without any sort of, integration program. They had no integration program whatsoever. you know, I was a kid and I was on my own, and you know, injected into this general sort of population, you know, of English students, with a few other Jewish students, but not very many, because there weren't many survivors. So, however, I still couldn't relate to the English students, even though I was in the same school as them. And I never spoke with other with other Canadian students. I didn't speak with the Canadians until actually grade 9.
It's a long time.
Yes, the whole primary school experience. Oh, I wonder if we could
Sure, we can
just
stop.
take a break. You know,
Sure.
I'd like to invite, this is my son. My son
Oh,
has just
wonderful.
appeared. Yes, so perhaps
that's wonderful. Yeah.
my son, Célie, just arrived, and so we took a break to open the door. And I'd like to welcome him to view the interview here with us. This is my son, Célie Weizfeld Castellan.
Wonderful. Can we...
Okay, turn this one.
Hi. My name is Célie.
Thank you.
C'est pas très bilingue aussi.
I don't know. Do you want to sit next to him while he goes and do it for you? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's going to be better if he's sitting there.
Right. I'll just. I have. Maybe
Pass.
let's go and. I need, you just need to just.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, so you can go in. Right. That's good. It's okay.
Yes, so during my whole primary school experience, I hardly spoke with Canadians at all. And it passed, fairly well. I mean, nobody really was disturbed by this, nobody really wanted to talk with me anyway, because I was Jewish. So it was a mutually agreed sense of alienation.
But in the school, there were just Christians in the public school that you were...
And a few Jewish people,
Okay.
a few Jewish students. There was one interaction that was notable, because this sort of mutual silence between us worked, except for the girls. Now, there was one girl in particular. Her name was Joan. I'll never forget her name. Who was very upset, that she didn't get my attention as she would easily have gotten the attention of any other, Canadian boy. And it was more explicitly forbidden for me, in a religious sense, not to speak with, a Canadian girl, because I wouldn't possibly consider, becoming a friend of a Canadian girl, because I would obviously only be oriented to getting married with a Jewish girl. You see, so there was this double sense of alienation with a Canadian girl. So Joanne was very upset by this, and during recess times, she had a whole gang of girls chasing me down in order to force me into some sort of social interaction. This went on like for weeks, and finally, it
So
sort
you
of
became the forbidden fruit.
So I mean, it became sort of more sort of intense as time went on. It was sort of quite an experience, and I was very determined not to speak with her. And finally, I had to, explain, that I didn't want to speak with her, and so I was obliged to speak with her as a result. So that seemed to solve the situation for the time being. I feel very sort of hot.
Talking about Joanne? Or?
No, it's because, I sort of feel embarrassed, that I was so alienated, but there was a great sense of alienation. You know, from
But
the
I'm
Canadians
interested,
at the time.
did you feel this was aggressive, these girls chasing you, or was there something seductive, there was something about you where they, I mean, girls do get interested in boys and chase them at a certain age, and
Yes.
so I'm wondering, you know...
No, it changed from being seductive to being a threat.
Mhm.
Yeah, I felt threatened, you know, because there was a large number of these girls, and they were, you know,
Like a pack
very
of them.
intent on capturing me.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I felt
And since
Mm.
I went through a bit the same
Yeah.
thing myself, and it was kind of, you know, we were trying to be apart, you know, not to bother anybody.
Mhm.
And if we would try to socialize with a girl, then it would be like some kind of a attack or something, you know, because then we were starting to go on their territory, you know what I mean? Like, if we have to exclude ourselves from the boys, then we have to exclude ourselves from the girls too, because otherwise it's like not that's the way I see it, but you know what I mean.
It's like the enemy lines are drawn, and there's no crossing over, or...
not so much enemy, you know, but some kind of a threat.
Mhm.
You know, if only in the sense that these girls wanted me to violate my own cultural code. You know, it was sort of, you know, enforced assimilation. And I was seeking to avoid assimilation because I wanted to maintain my national identity.
I didn't felt as assimilation, I guess maybe because I've been more in this community a little bit more than my dad. But I felt threatened myself in a way, like boys would get aggressive with me, and I would, and you know, I would be forced almost to go in corners where there's nobody, and all my recess I would stay there and write something and stay by myself, not to bother.
Because of your Jewish identity in the school that you were in, or?
Yes, that too. But it started with that, and then there's other things that got around to it. But it's a big part of this.
Yes, you should realize that Célie is one of the first Jewish students to go to the Francophone educational system here in Montreal, in Quebec. Because before it was not permitted. Jewish students were not permitted in the Francophone educational system, which was called the Catholic Board of Education. And even at the time when I brought him into the primary school Francophone system here, c'était encore la Commission scolaire catholique. And then it changed, you know, to the Francophone, you know, commission. But there was no other Jewish students in the whole city at the time.
No. Well, all the way through high school, I never met anyone who was Jewish.
Now, something parallel was also happening with me with respect to the other students who were Jewish, but Canadian Jewish. Because we had when I went to the public educational system, I went to a Jewish school as well as the...
after-school programs, or?
Yes, but it was 2 hours a night, from 7 until 9 o'clock, every night.
Where you'd study Hebrew, or?
No. You see, we were in a cheder, which was a traditional Jewish Orthodox school. So the language taught for oral communication was not Hebrew.
It was Yiddish.
It was Yiddish.
But not your mother's Yiddish, your father's Yiddish, or?
It was a European kind of Yiddish because the teachers were of the older generation. There was Mr. Cohn, who was a modern Orthodox teacher. He wasn't a rabbi. He shaved his beard, but he was a teacher. Then there was Mrs. Yakubovich, who was Chassid. You know, she was, you know, Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox. And she was a teacher of mine before Mr. Cohn. Mr. Cohn was of the higher levels of education. And he was also my bar mitzvah teacher. And then in the class we had half the class were Jewish refugee kids and half the class were Canadian Jewish kids. We were in downtown and we were in this, and the school was in a synagogue called the Beis Yehuda Talmud Torah. Well, this name of the synagogue was, or shul, as its name is in Yiddish. is the Yiddish name for synagogue, was the Shul Beis Yehuda, which means the house of God, basically. No, the house of Jews, sort of would be the simplest translation. The Jewish house of God, or something like that. And with the Canadian Jewish students in the classes, we didn't speak with them either, and they wouldn't speak with us. We were more interested in speaking with them than they were interested in speaking with us. And they would seek to avoid speaking with us because it was a question of status. Amongst the Canadian Jewish students in the school, they considered themselves to be superior because they came from a better off family, first of all, because they were more integrated in society. They were second or third generation. And also, because our English wasn't as good as their English, they considered themselves to be superior. And also because we were DPs.
Yes.
So they didn't want to talk with us. However, we cohabited, in the same school. We went through the bar mitzvah education and all that. And then afterwards, we had a bar mitzvah club. Now, in the bar mitzvah club, which met every Sunday, we didn't have any teachers around. So everything went, everything, there were no rules anymore. It was just, like anarchy. So what happened is that one of the refugee kids, Arnold, he was elected president, of the Bar Mitzvah Club. But he was more sort of integrated. He sort of, passed as a Canadian Jewish kid, and so he was, allowed to be president. But the others, they still didn't like us. And then one time we started to pretend to have a fight. And somehow the two teams got differentiated on the basis of either being a Canadian or being a refugee kid. And then this battle, which took place, started to get more and more violent. And, we started to use, these little pieces of plywood that were left lying around for some reason. And they made excellent flying projectiles. And we had, embarkments, to protect each side, and we had like a full-scale war happening there that day. And then, and they actually started to throw these things at us, So I took one of these and I aimed and I threw, and it actually sort of, danced over the head of this guy. So then I just called the whole thing off, and I just got up and I stopped the whole war, and I said, no, this is getting to be ridiculous, we can't continue like this. And everybody agreed, and we stopped the war. However, we didn't speak to each other, nonetheless. So
how did you understand that?
How did I understand that? That we taught them a lesson, that we know how to defend ourselves, and they had better not try to, assault us again. That's how I understood it. And they agreed, and they backed down.
And something shifted after that? Or?
Yes, they didn't sort of, there was more of a quietness between us. Whereas before there was, this harshness, harsh
or the threat, as
tone of
said,
voice, on their part, yeah. So it was really tough.
Did you feel less threatened after it?
I don't know about that, but I felt more pride in myself, for having stood up to them, and knowing that I could do so again, and knowing that they knew that I could, and them knowing that I knew that I knew that I could.
And that you also exercised enough control to stop it. Once you threw it, you
yes.
also didn't let it go further and to actually degenerate into violence.
Yes, so I guess they appreciated that. But they didn't express any such appreciation. So it was just, quieted down.
I just need to get you a little closer. Sorry. No, this way here is good. Yeah, so this way is.
One second.
Yeah.
Here it is.
That's good. Moving here. It's good. I have a question here. Did the Jewish kids, did they speak about the war? Or did they speak about the Holocaust? Or did they know about what had happened to you?
Nobody talked about the Holocaust. Neither us, nor our parents, nor the media, nor the school. Nobody. Until one day in grade 6, my first act of rebellion was when this teacher he was giving a history class, and he was on the side blackboard closer to me, on my side of the class, and I was sitting in one of the back seats. I always sat in the back because I didn't want to be looked at, by the students, by the other students. And right in the middle of some explanation of something, he goes completely out of context, and he makes reference to how the Jews in the Middle Ages killed Christian babies. So, I hear this, and without thinking, I just jumped up, I pointed at him, and I said in a loud voice, "That's a lie." Now, the teacher...
Oh, sorry, I'll let you finish.
The teacher, he was so shocked. He just stood there, with his hand still up at the board. And he was paralyzed. He couldn't move, he didn't know what to say. And the students, they were so frightened that they also were paralyzed. It was like a general neurotic trance that I induced, with those words. And this lasted, for about 7 seconds, until finally I realized that nobody here was going to be able to cope with this. Mm-hmm. And I just slowly sat down, and we all pretended that nothing had happened, and the teacher went on with his class.
I have a very similar experience myself. When I arrived in high school, we were in this moral class,